Railways companies have benefited massively from the increase in expenditure by the government. Earlier, you could tell the financiers to go take a walk. Today, the financiers will tell you to go take a walk. We want to see disproportionate growth of the order of 30, 40, 50% a year. Because the equation of power has changed, promoters are more willing to say, well, we will not default. So if the strategic concept of a Surge India is to target, make, consume and invest, how do you decide which companies to buy? So you decide that all of these will result in a disproportionate gain only in a few companies. So for instance, I do not think that people will produce a greater set of values for a Nestle, for instance. So Nestle is a listed company in India and it will grow at maybe 15%. This is not disproportionate growth. This is just about the same growth as India will see on a nominal basis. We want to see disproportionate growth of the order of 30, 40, 50% a year over the next decade. Now, who benefits from this? So take import substitution as a theme, it becomes a relatively higher end manufacturing, whether it is the manufacturing of the end product by itself or whether it's production of machinery which helps these end products. So for instance, a lot of machines in India are imported because they're imported from Germany, because the demand in India has not been so much that you can build something. But a lot of the both the consumables and the equipment that are used in these machinery are now starting to get built more by Indian companies. These companies were largely serving either markets abroad or a very small population here. They're seeing a disproportionate rise in orders. So a semiconductor testing machine, for instance, we may be importing semiconductors. We used to import full phones earlier. Now we import semiconductors. To put them on a printed circuit board and test them, you need testing machinery to ensure that everything is in place. That testing machinery was again imported earlier. Now parts of that testing machinery is being manufactured in India. When you manufactured it earlier, your demand was 1 or 2 machines that would probably be done. Now it is 5,000. The same thing with defense. We're spending more on defense to the point of we're creating import substitution themes as well, where we're telling people that listen, we'll buy your equipment, but don't expect that you will be the ones that will be developing the spare parts. If you buy a gun, the bullets should be made by an Indian company. If we buy an airplane, the spare parts should be manufactured by an Indian company. This makes sense from a defense perspective because in a war, you don't want to be dependent on a foreign country for spare parts and service. Your import substitution theme creates a massive demand. So from the 100 orders to the 5,000 orders, the 50x jump is what we like. That's one theme. Based on this, I think we have the energy independence. The idea being that import substitution of crude oil can actually result in India getting a far higher benefit. The government recognizes this. So they give subsidies to both electric vehicles, manufacturing and the process from electric buses to electric vehicles itself, to also other forms of energy production, including renewables such as solar. They're importing solar panels perhaps, but building massive solar infrastructure in India itself. Eventually, we'll manufacture a lot of the solar panels as well, whether it is large solar farms, large wind farms, nuclear plants, hydel power plants, natural gas usage, and coal itself. All of which we can actually harness in a way to replace some of the crude oil-based energy sources for transportation, energy sources for backup, such as diesel generators, and so on. So tomorrow our need for backup power may just come down because our production has increased quite substantially. Energy independence therefore becomes a theme. Who do you invest in such a theme? The underlying industries when people in the power space. It can be the power manufacturer, it can be the power distribution company, it can be the people who finance the power lines, it can be people who build the transmission infrastructure, the transformers, the DC-based power equipment. We will actually see a lot more of these companies evolve and generate disproportionately high profit, disproportionately high revenues as well. Domestic consumption. We don't have brands. We love brands. We want companies that help build brands and help enhance those brands' presence. Some of the domestic consumption stories could be around travel and hospitality. We don't have as much of tourism in India as perhaps India deserves. So therefore, the companies in these sectors, whether they're tourism, whether they're hospitality, hotels, for instance, or just travel, either agencies or software companies making software specifically for travel. All of these will benefit in a disproportionate way. Domestic consumption is a theme which overarching reaches across multiple sectors. But I think that theme has a lot of companies that will benefit disproportionately. Now, there are areas in India where logistics has changed. Logistics has changed not just because of the better availability of technology, where we're saying that you can track your stuff at real time, but also because of physical changes on the ground. There's a dedicated freight corridor that's coming up in the north and the west. By 2024, you should see some parts of it getting seriously operational. 2025, a lot more. We will see a separate line, a separate entire train line being built. That's already been built to service only freight. This is a separate line that will go through mountains and has tunnels the size that can actually take not just one container, but two containers stacked one on top of the other over long trains without any train stations. They're actually logistics parks with cranes that carry containers directly from trucks and otherwise onto from the east, the ports in the west, to the consumption centers in the north, and again ports in the east to the consumption centers in the north. You're seeing these north and west corridors, dedicated freight corridors come up. But what it also does, it increases the number of passenger trains, because currently passenger trains share their logistics infrastructure alongside of freight trains. Freight trains are loaded on platforms. They will be loaded in logistics parks. People will be loaded on platforms. So I'll have more passenger trains. If I have more passenger trains, I have more people that can travel today, where today travel is impossible in a train without it being booked for months on end. You will actually see a change in passenger infrastructure that will come about. So both from a travel and tourism and also from an e-commerce and general commerce infrastructure, you'll see logistics play a big part. Logistics players themselves will benefit perhaps disproportionately. Also because along with the rail, it's also the roads. The road network is changing. Our older trucks, which were just regular trucks with bodies, are now being changed to retrofit into taking containers. As these increase in infrastructure penetration, we're going to see logistics being a very big part of the themes going forward. So now you add logistics to the mix. Now let's also say that almost all of these themes get financed by the equity markets, by the bond markets, and the financialization theme is real. We're talking about people being able to invest more. We're also talking about companies in the investment space being able to benefit a lot more from all of these companies raising capital on the capital markets, whether it's debt or equity, and foreign investors also participating in the India story over time. I think that part, the financialization theme, is quite real as well. The part that is a fifth, which is beyond the four that we've discussed, is a layer of infrastructure that India is developing anyway. Now, it will help the logistics areas, it will help manufacturing, it will help even effectively financialization as well, because they will source a lot of their work from there. But the way things are working in India is that the government is spending a lot more on infrastructure. Let me spend 2 minutes talking about why. The government has not realized tax revenues at this level as it has ever before. The tax revenues at a personal income tax level are growing at 20+% per year. At the corporate level are growing 15+% a year. Now, the government is starting to see these revenues flowing in a mega way. Now, they're spending that money not on subsidies as much as they are on actual infrastructure. I'll give you an example. Railways companies have benefited massively from the increase in expenditure by the government. The government used to spend maybe 25 or 30,000 crores in capex per year. Now they're spending 100,000 crores in capex per year for about the last 4 years. They probably would have spent more. So infrastructure as a broad story is actually doing wonders simply because the government is able to earn more money, the government is able to spend more money, the government is able to finance the expenditure through capital markets and InvITs and different kinds of products that can be used, bonds, green bonds. These changes are real and they're all coming in place because they've started over a period of time. Take these and the overarching story of relatively smart financial changes that have happened, like the bankruptcy code, which forces companies to start acting in the benefit of even their financiers. Earlier, you could tell the financiers to go take a walk. Today, the financiers will tell you to go take a walk. They will take your company and walk away with it. So because of the bankruptcy code, because the equation of power has changed, promoters are more willing to say, well, we will not default because you will take our company away from us. And if you don't default, you create a better banking system. If you create a better banking system, the banks will benefit, yes, and will probably participate a little bit in the banking theme as well as part of the financialization as a theme. But it is this overarching help because it now promotes more manufacturing, which can get more loans because banks are willing to give them, which can finance themselves using bonds because the financial markets are strong, which can build products for Indian consumption because the domestic consumption story is strong, which can also therefore piggyback on top of great logistics that have been built because of the improvements in technology, improvements in infrastructure, which by itself is a theme because infrastructure spending, the players in the infrastructure also benefit downstream because of all the spending by the government. All of this generates more taxes that fuels more activity in all of these sectors. You have Surge as finally a theme that is starting to work because India has reached thresholds which it never did earlier. So Surge India does have a lot of stocks. 80% of the portfolio is within the themes that I mentioned, and there are about 30 to 35 stocks. Now you might wonder why 30 to 35 stocks make a portfolio. We have 5 themes. You have to get the best of the benefit of many of these themes as they grow along. You're going to need a few companies at least to participate in each of these themes, and therefore in each of the sub areas which these themes encompass. Some of our companies will straddle multiple themes. A Reliance, for instance, is both an import substitution story, an energy independent story, a domestic consumption story, and perhaps partly an infrastructure story as well. You might find other companies that are specific around domestic consumption itself or around financialization itself. But the portfolio will encompass about 30 to 35 companies, 20 of which will form 80% of the overall portfolio itself. A small portion, about 10% of the overall portfolio, may be of companies that do not meet any of these themes per se, but are what we call special situations. So, for instance, it could be a tax change that affects the companies themselves. It could be a demerger that is happening, which we feel where the sum of the parts is much greater than the individual company itself. It could be another layer of changes that is happening inside of management. Maybe the next generation is taking over and they seem to be more dynamic. The special situations which we look at are typically 2 to 3 year, less than 3 year kind of stories where we think that the return can be disproportionately high to our investors compared to investing in something normal. So 5 to 10% of your portfolio is special situations, sometimes a little more than that, but most of the portfolio is among the themes, 30 to 35 stocks. We do have some level of churn because as you identify new themes, a new company may look more interesting, or a company may have changed fundamentals so much that we don't like it anymore. These changes will ensure that we will continue to churn our portfolio over a period of time, but we don't expect the churn to be more than 100%. Only in extreme times we expect that churn will be massive, and our returns, as we mentioned them, are always net of transaction costs, net of our fees.